Warning: the following program may contain material not be suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised.
The borders of space and time have opened once again. And transmitting from the mountains of West Virginia, it's time once again for Let's Find Out with Diego. The universe is waiting for you. Wake up and remember.
On this episode of Let's Find Out, our guest is an Atlanta-based storyteller who blends the everyday with the eerie. His inspiration can come from the creeping terror behind perfect picket fences to the dark history hidden in old stone walls. He has been recently featured in Bold Journey magazine, and he's ready to terrify you with tales of haunted dolls, haunted objects, and diabolical games. All this plus more. Please welcome our new friend and first-time guest, award-winning author, DC Phillips. DC, my friend, welcome to Let's Find Out.
Thank you so much, Diego. I'm glad to be here, and I got chills with that introduction. I feel like I need that introduction more often, just regular phone calls during the week.
No,
Nice
listen,
confidence boost.
I'll be your hype man. What is that movie? Now it comes to mind. It was back in the medieval times. It had Heath Ledger in it,
Oh,
and
gosh, A Knight's Tale. Was that
A
it?
Knight's Tale. Yeah, and I could be your hype man.
I like it. I approve. This is good. Already got something good in the works here.
Oh, perfect. We'll talk offline about it, man. I think I got a new part-time job now. Now, I
For
first
sure.
met you, I'll say not long ago, but we were just talking about offline about 3 months ago, almost 4 months ago at Fright Reads in Maryland. What a great event that was. Harry put on something spectacular. I didn't know it was going to be this big. And
Yeah.
I went to your table. You're one of the first people I talked to. You were so nice to me. We had a great conversation. And I was originally going to have you on Bonus Overdrive Wednesday because normally I save Bonus Overdrive for different subjects. But as we got talking, you're like, well, I do have experience with paranormal and investigations and experiences. So I said, great, let's put you on. Let's find out. We're going to get into that very shortly as well. We'll be talking about, well, your newest book, the compilation that just came out not long ago, hot off the press.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Still warm, at least.
Yes. And I love the cover because it reminded me of, we'll talk about that later. I'm going to get lost in the sauce here. Effigies
We
and
got a lot to talk
Incantation.
about.
Well, we got tons to talk about. But first off, I want to congratulate you because you recently won a Best Indie Book Award winner for The Flayer, man. Congratulations on that.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that was a really nice surprise. I had basically submitted the flare months and months ago, and they go through their process to select winners in each category. And so the flare won for the novella category, and it was exciting on multiple levels. I feel like novellas and short stories, people are kind of rediscovering. I think we moved away from that format for a while, but I love it. I love short, punchy fiction with nice twists, and it's very much 80s slasher inspired. There's lots of dark humor, and it felt really nice, especially as an indie author, to be recognized that way. So I'm excited for my plaque to come in the mail and make it really official.
Well, how did you find out that you won? Did they send you an email first, or did they just put it out there on socials and say, hey, man, you got it?
They did send an email first, which I was happy about because I know with some of the awards online circulating around, you do sometimes find out, hey, here's the list of finalists. It's almost like in high school, I was in theater, and you almost feel like a theater kid going up to the bulletin board after school, like, oh gosh, did we make it, in real time? And so it was nice to get a little bit of a heads up. They were super professional and asked for marketing materials and that sort of thing. And so, yeah, had a little heads up and had to sit on it for a week or two. But it's nice to be able to talk about it now and share that news.
Yeah, I saw that pop out on the Facebook feed. It's like, oh, we're definitely going to talk about that. And then you brought something up.
Yes.
You're talking about theater. Now that you're an award-winning author, Let's go back in time a little bit. Let's take Brian Paoni's DeLorean. We're going to go back in time a little bit. What was life for
Yeah.
DC Phillips prior to becoming an author? Was this always your journey, or were you doing something completely different at that time?
Yeah, it's funny because I think a lot of writers or a lot of people who are creative in any way can relate to this. But even in school, I would write stories and draw pictures to go along with those stories. And I think I even probably scared a few teachers with some of the stories that I submitted for creative writing projects. They're like, "Oh, this is morbid." But by the time I got to high school, that started to evolve a little bit, and I even recently recovered an external hard drive that I thought was lost forever. And I even found a movie that I made with some friends about this sort of slasher story that I wrote in high school. So it's kind of funny to see that come full circle. Um, there were even manuscripts that I had written all the way back then that I've uncovered and reread. Sometimes you think I was young, that's probably garbage, toss it out. But you reread it and you're like, okay, the writing could use some polishing, but I like the idea here. So there are definitely some ideas that I've either salvaged or that I've cleaned up and been able to put out there in collections and anthologies. So that's a really nice feeling, and one that I'm sure a lot of creatives can relate to.
Yeah, similar to, I believe, to musicians. Well, they'll get in a studio, they'll record some stuff, and then either it gets lost in the tapes or somewhere down the road. It's like, oh, this riff is really good, and then you never know,
Yeah.
a great song can come out of that. It's part of the creative process in a way. So then, from that point, I'm curious to see when in your life did you get involved with the paranormal? Because it seems, I'm not saying this seems to be a shift, but how did that start? And are you still kind of involved with that today?
Mhm. Yes, and yes. I would say that for a lot of people who are into horror, dark and creepy things, horror authors, I think a lot of us have real life experiences at a young age that sort of plant that seed and really push that interest. Um, it's funny because since we met at Fright Reads, I've kept up with your podcasts, and I
Thank
believe
you.
one of your recent guests even went into their experiences with shadow people. And that's something that I don't even like saying out loud, because they
Mm,
say what is the saying that when you peer into the void, things that are there peer back? The more you want to know about those entities and those things in another realm or whatever, they want to know more about you. So it's not something that I talk about every day. But yeah, at a young age, I remember having experiences with shadow people. There's always kind of that archetype of a shadowy figure in a broad brimmed black hat. And so, now with I kind of grew up on that line. I'm a millennial, and I grew up pre and post internet. And it's been really crazy to read on Reddit and these other forums of people describing that exact same entity that you saw in dreams as a kid and that sort of thing. So those experiences do definitely go way back. And for me, they always kind of center around that liminal space between waking and sleeping. But it was very real to me. I gotta say that.
I believe you talk about Hat Man, right?
Yes, yeah. And
So,
yeah, you get a chill, right? You don't it's kinda I don't know, I don't even like saying the name always, but I saved it for your podcast. So, we're both talking about him, not to make light or be flippant, right? But
yeah.
hey, if he visits one of us, he's gonna visit both of us.
Y-
So, at least there's
you're
safety in
not,
numbers.
yeah, you're not lying there. I think that back long before you, when I was in high school, there was a girl talking in class about very similar description of something she saw in her dreams as well. And
Mhm.
back then, there's bullies everywhere. When they kind of hear a story, they start bullying you or making fun of you. But if you start mentioning Hat Man to her, she would go nuts because it was that
Yeah,
terrifying to her.
yeah. And, with the real prominence of the internet and platforms where people can discuss. I think that's probably why people gravitate toward your podcast, because you do feel like, wow, I'm not the only one. I'm not crazy. People don't think I'm a total lunatic because I am describing this experience. So there's a real sense of community in that, I think.
And you touched on something there because one of the reasons why this podcast began is because I wanted to have a conversation with like-minded people who've had the similar experiences in order to help me figure things out and questions
Hmm.
that I have about the subject, not only with paranormal, UFOs, and cryptozoology and beyond. Because when you have all these kind of experiences in your life, it's always nice to have a community, whether large or small, that can relate to what you're doing and have a conversation about it.
Yeah, 100%.
Now, how much of this? Well, hold on, because you said also we're talking about fright reads that you've also done some investigations. What locations have you gone to?
Yeah, most of mine have been fairly amateur, I would say. But I've definitely had some experiences that have told me there is something beyond, right? Um, I think probably the one that had the biggest impact, where it was a true investigation, was actually something I found on Groupon. And you can pretty much guarantee experiences that you find in Groupon are either going to be some of the worst or best of your life, right? There's no real in between. And so this was in Tennessee, outside of Chattanooga, and probably about 10 years ago, because the memories popped up on Facebook not that long ago. Um, but it's a place called Hales Bar Dam, and forgive me, if I don't get the history 100% correct. I am a fiction author, so I take things and run with it.
Mm.
But of the actual historical facts of behind the location. But this was a dam that was not active for very long. It was built in the early 1900s. There were tons of accidents, flooding. There was even allegedly, according to legend, a group of school children who would use one of the tunnels to cut through from a little neighborhood to school every day. And there was a flash flood, and all of those kids were carried away one day and never located. And so there's a ton of history. I think it's been on one of the ghost hunting shows, um, and so they say that it's centered around a whirlpool that had, I believe it was a Cherokee name that essentially meant place of death or something along those lines. And so you can imagine it's already steeped in history. There's so much lore surrounding it. And there were probably three spots inside that dam that really were mind blowing to me. Um, the first one, there's an area where people leave toys for, they say, one of the children who was swept away. And, you sit in the dark, you're all gathered around in a circle. You can't even see the people around you. You can't see your hand in front of your face, but you can hear footsteps. After everything goes pitch black, the flashlights are out, you don't have to wait that long, and you hear this echoing coming up the hall. And it's one of those things where obviously skeptics can always explain away. Oh, they must have had a sound system. Oh, there must have been somebody else down the hallway. But when you're in it, and I was just in that hallway, there's nowhere for a third party to hide. There isn't that echoey or scratching of a sound system. It was very real in that moment. And yeah, I did not sleep for 2 days after that,
Well, I can
being
imagine.
totally transparent here. From there, it actually got even, I will say, creepy. I don't know. For anyone who's experienced real paranormal activity, I think it's not always necessarily the scare factor. There's also a sadness or sorrow to it, because according to Shin, there were two men who actually fell in while that concrete was being poured. And at that time, and it was one of the most impactful paranormal moments I've experienced.
terrifying to say the least. Now, with that experience that you've had and then others after that, how much of that influenced your writing?
A lot. You know, every time I'm at an event like a Fright Reads, on my table I have one title in particular that we as members of the Atlanta chapter of the Horror Writers Association put together, and it's called Georgia Gothic. And so people will ask, are these true stories? And my answer is always, well, it's legend, it's folklore, it came from somewhere, right? And so sort of yes and no to that question. Um, I would say there are definitely places that I'll pull from. There are occurrences, dreams that I've had that I'll take and I'll run with. And so I would say whether comes from a history book or our subconscious, these events and these places and these entities, happenings, things, encounters, whatever you want to call it, definitely form the foundation for pretty much everything I write.
Excellent. And it seems to be the formula seems to be working for you, my friend. So we're gonna fast forward now to effigies and incantation. I was talking to you at the table because the cover, um, it's already creepy enough. A ventriloquist dummy. They they're one of those things that
Yep,
for
yep.
me, I'm gonna say they terrify me, but it already puts me in that element of creepy. And I
hmm
was sharing the story with you, not about because I've had experience. I've never held one. I've seen one. I won't touch them. Like some people have things for clowns, these ventriloquist dummies, especially old style looking ones. Super creepy, brother.
Yeah.
There was I don't know what decade in the 1900s. I'm gonna shoot for during the big radio time before there was TV. There was a very famous person back then that had a ventriloquist act, but here's the best part. But he did it on the radio.
Huh.
Back then, this person was super famous worldwide for having an act. And back then there was no TV, so you have to use your imagination. I'm saying, did he really need the dummy who could just fake the whole thing? But
Right.
his his daughter was actually a very famous actress in the 80s. So she couldn't fake that because she actually had to do the work on the camera. That's a tangent. We'll talk about this another day. But with the cover, it's a collection of stories from different authors, correct?
Yes, yeah. And what's really great is like you said, the ventriloquist dummies, doll, just like clowns. There's such a classic trope and a classic theme. So working with the cover artist Lynn Hanson, super talented. She came up with something, had something ready actually, that fit perfectly along with the stories that were included. And it's interesting because it's one of those things, like you said, at different events, people walk by my table and that dump catches their eyes because it's so classic. And so the stories in the collection and the anthology are from different authors. I have two in there myself. And it's a lot of fun because, yes, we have the classic tropes of haunted dolls, but there are also twists. We take it into cosmic territory. We take it into domestic horror and, what might be lurking around your own home. There's some supernatural. And so I think it's nice because it really is a mixed bag of a lot of horror tropes and even subgenres that we all love. Those of us who love scary things.
And that we do, my friend. So who's featured in the book? What authors did you choose to have in there?
Oh, we've got a nice roster. So we've got William Sterling, we've got Don Major. A lot of people are active in the Horror Writers Association. So if others are follow HWA or are part of it, they'll recognize some names. We've also got Laura McMurray, Kim Penzon, and just a ton of really great, talented people who we have people who are more seasoned and have more work out there in the open, and we have a couple of people who just were publishing a couple of pieces for the first time, and so that was exciting too to be able to work with them. We've also got C.O. Davidson. I can go on and on. There are 17 of us, so it's a nice roster.
And did you choose them authors yourself, or is it one of them say, "Hey, man, would you mind checking this work out?" And out of all the horror stories, which ones, what kind were you looking for to include in there? Were there any specific themes, or you just went with what they sent you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it started out because William Sterling and I started comparing notes, and we each had doll stories that we had just laying around, essentially, and we weren't sure what to do with them. I started talking to a couple of other people, and they said the same thing, since it is so classic. And so I put out on Instagram a feeler, a call for submissions, and I was really surprised by what came back. I basically put out the call asking for stories about uh, haunted dolls, cursed objects, diabolical games. And so the stories that came back to me, we even have the story about a cursed mixtape. We've got one about that's an urban legend about a game that's played in a small southern town by Can Wiggins. It's one of my favorites, probably, I would have to say. We got some of the more typical killer doll stories that are just a lot of fun by Mark Monroe. And I received some submissions by people I had never met. And so that was what was cool, because this call for submissions, because it went out online, went to the far corners of the earth, right? And so that was really cool to see stories come in from people I didn't know, but now I've gotten to know and I've been introduced to. And it was really exciting to be able to work with them. And sometimes when you do have a specific theme, as the editor, you're giving guidance and feedback on how we can shape this story to fit the theme a bit more closely. Or if we have multiple porcelain dolls, hey, could you do this in your story to kind of set yours apart and to distinguish it? And so that was really cool to be able to make sure that all of these stories mesh and they flow one from the next, and each giving us something new.
And so, Tally, how many stories are there in the book currently?
Eight. Yeah, so 17 distinct authors and 18 stories. So it's a
Oh,
nice,
yeah.
it's a nice mix, especially when I'm meeting people at events and they ask, "What would you recommend?" Or "I'm not a big reader." I tell them short stories are great way to get back into reading for people who maybe have taken a break or feel like they don't have the attention span to commit to a 500-page epic novel.
And there's definitely something to that because I've been noticing more and more a lot of compilations and more short stories being published, and I kind of like
Mhm.
those stories. And sometimes these short stories, it's a challenge because you really got to tell every bit of that story in such a short amount of pages. It's I can imagine be kind of stressful to do something like that.
Yeah, sometimes with shorter fiction, you really have to streamline it. You really have to pare it down. There's a big boom of flash fiction, and I've tried my hand at that, where it's like sometimes it's maybe 1,000 word limit, but that can be a real challenge. And as a writer, it's a lot of fun because you have to be very intentional with your words. You don't have a ton of extra room to spare, so it can be a lot of fun.
And so, what's been the feedback so far for effigies and incantations?
I am really excited to share that I also just found out it made the 2025 list of recommended works for the Horror Writers Association. And that's something that people actually go in, members of the HWA go in and they can nominate. So that means that people connected with it, even people who were not featured or didn't have stories submitted to it. So that's really exciting to see that coming together. And we'll see. There's voting that should happen early next year to see what makes the actual ballot for what we call the Stoker Awards. They're like the top prize, the Grammy or the Emmy, or of horror writing. And so far the reception has been really great, and that's exciting to put something out into the world, and you don't know what those Goodreads reviews are going to look like, or those Amazon reviews are going to look like, until they start coming in. And again, total strangers are putting their reviews online and saying that they really are connecting with the material and enjoying it. So there's nothing like that feeling.
We're full of excellent news today. So we're gonna hop on the excellent news topic here with your award for the Flare. Let's talk about the Flare. What is that about?
Oh yeah. So the flare, when people come by my table and they ask what is my favorite work or what do I recommend, this was really my first time trying my hand at longer form fiction. It is still a novella, so it's a quick roller coaster of a ride. Uh, but people have compared it to an urban legend. I was really inspired by 80s movies like Fright Night when I wrote it, because there's a lot of heart to the characters. One reader even referred to it as cozy in a review, which when there's blood and guts and gore, that was a real compliment to me, that people see the characters as relatable and approachable. But it's funny, we're tying this back to real events or real places, and in the flare there is an urban legend in this small southern town that basically says there's a serial killer, potentially of supernatural origins, living in an old abandoned mill. And for me, there are a few places and stories that I picked up throughout my childhood, my youth, that I use for inspiration. One of them being it's actually a venue, or was a music venue in Atlanta, called the Masquerade. And it was actually the first nightclub I ever went to at 18 years old. And the venue was in this old mill called the Dupree Excelsior Mill. So it's this old building, creaky floors with 3 levels. And I mean, there could be 3 different shows going on at the same time. But the floors would creak so much and people were in the mosh pits, you really were afraid you might fall through. But the floors were called Hell, Purgatory, and Heaven, which already gives it kind of a gothic feel. And there were rumors, because they did have these goth nights and these sort of dark industrial nights, that there were real vampires that frequented this place. And I know, people may scoff, they may think it sounds silly, but it was a very real thing that people said, that there was one vampire in particular who lived in the attic space and in the shadows. And, if you went to one of these goth nights, you had to be careful and watch your back. So that was a lot of fun. And again, it's one of those places that I use. My fiction is very grounded in these real places that do exist.
Man, can you imagine how much energy you have to play in order to conjure up these spirits or vampires to come check out a show?
That's what I'm saying. And to live there, those must have been some talented acts to really put up with that 24/7. But yeah, if people Google it, it's the Masquerade. And actually, I looked it up for some reason not that long ago, and it's a really creepy place, because there's no real definition or defined time, that it just sort of kind of started popping up in news articles in Atlanta in the 1890s. And the first mention of it, the first reference, was to the death of an employee there. So it's a very mysterious, it's an Atlanta staple, I would say. It's moved on to a new location, but everybody knows the Masquerade in dark and spooky circles, I would say.
I tell you what, there are many people out there that have probably gone to this location and have stories. I would love for them to either get a hold of you or me and just start
Yeah.
talking about it. Send us your stories, because I'm curious to know, did they see these vampires? What acts
Mhm.
played there? What kind of experience did you have? And because you're talking about 3 layers, that's a lot of energy.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
of
definitely.
but no, I'm thinking maybe I'll have to do a little bit of road trip. I think you and I will go. We'll hang out and see what conjures up, my friend. And now I know that, I mean, 2025 is already ending, and we are in December. What's coming up with you for 2026?
I'm so glad you asked. I've got some projects in the works. One that I'm really excited about. I'm actually co-authoring a young adult thriller with a friend, Vanessa Reed. She's also featured in Effigies and Incantations. Extremely talented, and I feel like our styles mesh really well. We're referring to this new project as sort of I Know What You Did Last Summer meets Fried Green Tomatoes. So very Southern Gothic inspired, and again, lots of history incorporated. There's it was a mental hospital in Atlanta, Central State in Milledgeville, Georgia, and it's long since operation, but some of the buildings do still stand. And that's one of the central focus points and central locations of our story. And so, yeah, we're going back in time. Her parts, she's focusing on the way past, and I'm focusing on 30 years later, which is still in the past. It's going to be in the 90s probably, of a grandmother and her granddaughter, and some of the secrets that they keep from each other and what they find out over the course of a summer. So really excited about that one. It's in the works.
I would love to bring you back once that's released on the show. We'll talk about that. Here's a question maybe you're not prepared to answer. It's not a gotcha question. I like to every once in a while mix it up. Now, I'm not too spicy of a question, of course. If you were to put a soundtrack to the Flare,
Ooh.
who would you have on that?
Oh, that's a great question. And I think probably, I mean, dream big, right? I would say the Flare is very cinematic. It's very inspired by 80s slashers in particular. So we got to get John Carpenter, right? Who better? That's somebody, as I write, I actually will listen to the soundtrack of The Fog or the Lost Themes album. And so, yeah, let's get John Carpenter on it. Why not?
That's a winner for me. Anything John Carpenter.
Exactly. Can't go wrong with a slasher soundtrack with John Carpenter in the background.
Truer words have never been spoken on this show, my friend. Now, for the our listeners who are our friends of Let's Find Out, they want to get to know more about what you do, your projects, your books. Where can they go find out?
I would say I'm probably most active on Instagram, followed by Facebook. But if you want to find me, I'm at linktr.com/frightful fables. So if you Google Frightful Fables, you will find me all over the socials. I'm everywhere.
Excellent. And I'll put all the links in the show description once the episode is released. DC, my friend, has been awesome having you on the show. I look forward to having you back in 2026. And let's stay in touch, man.
Yes, please. I'm a fan now. I'm a listener, so I'll be tuning in for sure.
Thank you, my friend.
Copyright Diego the Podcaster. All content for Let's Find Out is the property of Diego the Podcaster and is served directly from our servers with no modification, redirects, or rehosting. All celebrity impersonators are paid performers. The impersonated celebrities do not endorse or promote any views or opinions expressed by our guests, Diego the Podcaster, or Let's Find Out. The information shared on Let's Find Out with Diego is provided on an as-is basis, with no guarantees of completeness, accuracy, usefulness, or timeliness.